The sermon that we want to preach today is God's promise in the midst of trials and afflictions. God will prevail. And we want to look at Joseph and 6 lessons that we can learn from Joseph in the midst of trials and afflictions. So God's promise in the midst of trials and afflictions. When we go through trials and afflictions in our life, do we sometimes think, this is it, I'm not going to get out of it. God's not able to take care of me. But we have to always remember that God will prevail. He will always prevail. God always prevails. And we want to look at that today. Is there anyone here this morning that has not had pain in life, that has not gone through afflictions, that have not gone through trials? Anybody here? We all have faced trials in our lives. Whether you're young or older, we all go through struggles in our life according to each phases of our life. You may be in school, you may be in college, you may be at work, you may be retired. We face trials. You may be a pastor, you may be a teacher, you may be a Bible study teacher, you may be a matured Christian, you may be a young Christian. You will face trials and afflictions in your life. And we want to look at that today. So, looking at Joseph. Okay? Can we say Joseph? Yes. More awake now? Okay? 6 things that we want to look at today. See, Joseph spent 13 years in slavery and in prison. How many years? 13 years. He was 17 years old when his brothers sold Joseph into slavery. The Midianite slave trader came by when his brothers have dumped Joseph in the pit. And Joseph's crying for help. They wanted to kill him, except for his brother Reuben, who says, no, let's not kill our brother. Let's not shed. Let his blood not be in our hand. At that time, the Midianite slave trader came by, and they sold him for what? 20 shekels of silver. 20 shekels. They sold him. So, the Midianite in turn went to Potiphar, who was the officer of Pharaoh. He was the officer, a guard commander of Pharaoh, and the Midianites sold him to Potiphar. Now, so Joseph no longer lived with his father. He no longer is growing up in the love and embrace of his mother. He is not wearing the multicolored tunic anymore because that has been torn and smeared with blood. They killed a lamb. Okay? You remember that Joseph had 2 dreams. In one of the dreams, his brothers were worshiping him. And they didn't like him because of that. In the other dream, mother and father was also giving honor to Joseph. When Joseph told his dreams to his father, the brothers hated him. The brothers hated him because his father loved him more than them too. He was the only one that got the multicolored tunic. There is a play now. You have had that play, Many Colors of Joseph's Coat. Yeah. So, what about the dreams then? 13 years in prisons. God has given him a dream that he will be great. That Joseph will become great. Do you think in prison or in slavery, do you think Joseph is thinking, oh yeah, my dream is going to come true. This is an ideal path to success, to be a slave and to be in prison. Would you chart out a path to climb up to the ladder that let me be a slave and a prisoner, and this is a resume for great success? No, not so at this time. Even you, what would you feel if you've been sold as a slave? How would you feel if you were in prison? What can we learn from Joseph in the midst of trials and afflictions? And the first thing that we want to learn, first thing that we want to learn is that you're going to look at pastor. And we want to be productive. Okay? The first thing that we want to learn from Joseph in the midst of trials and affliction is that we can be productive. We can be productive in good times, and we can be productive in hard times. Now, when you go back, even though Jacob loved Joseph, Joseph would say, I want to go where my brothers are. I want to help my brothers. And he would take food to them. That's how he was sold into slave. But he wanted to be productive. Okay? But even in difficult times, see, our destiny is not determined by our circumstances. We have to know that. Our destiny is not determined by our circumstances. Who determines our destiny? It's God who determines our destiny. Okay? So, knowing that, see, when we read the story of Joseph, we find that Joseph did not complain to the master or to God or to curse God for becoming a slave. When you read the story, he did not curse the Lord and say, God, why me? Why am I being a slave? What about the dream that you gave to me? Why am I here in Potiphar's house? He didn't say that. In fact, he was very productive. How do we know that? Because the master saw that Joseph was very successful. Genesis 39. The master saw that Joseph was very successful. And there's one more thing that he saw. He saw that God was with him. Okay? You cannot become successful if you do not do anything. You cannot be successful if you complain about your circumstances. You cannot be successful if you are in sorrow, in pain, and blaming God for going through trials and afflictions in your life. And you say, God, until you take this away, I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to be around here and do nothing in my life. No, Joseph was not complaining. He was not cursing God. He committed himself to be productive. Productive in good times, productive in bad times. How often we complain to God and resort to withdraw from God. And our responsibility is when we go through trials and afflictions. We blame God and then we withdraw ourselves. We may be born in a bad environment. We may be born in a bad circumstances. That doesn't mean you're a bad person. I want you to know that, right? Being born in a bad environment and bad circumstances does not mean you're a bad person. It does not determine our character. How we live our life determines our character. How we respond to God determines our character. In this case, Joseph was in bad situation. He was in bad environment. But was Joseph a bad person? No. He was not, because he responded to lead a fruitful life even in trials and affliction. His master knew his hard work. And Joseph continued to strive for personal excellence in slavery. Very important that when we go through trials and afflictions, that people see that God is with us in that difficult time. Just as his master saw in Joseph's life, that God was with him. But if we complain, if we curse, if we have bad attitude, people are not going to see God in our trials and afflictions. They will just see that we are complaining all the time. That we have forgotten why we are there. Oh, the Lord help us. The Lord was with Joseph, and he was a successful man, and he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, and the Lord made all he did prosper in his hand. Genesis 39, 2-3. So the first thing was that Joseph was productive in trials and affliction. And I want us to be productive even when we go through difficult times. The second thing is accountability. Can you say accountability? Yeah. Yes, be accountable to people and be accountable to God. Now, when his master saw that the Lord was with him and he was successful, what did he do? He gave everything in his house, whatever he has, in the hand of Joseph. All that he had, he put under the hand of Joseph. He gave control to Joseph, everything he has, except what? Except his wife. Except his wife. Everything under Potiphar, he gave it to Joseph, except his wife. So he was not accountable. Now, when we read the story, Joseph was not only accountable to Potiphar, but you will find that Joseph was accountable to God. He was accountable to God. You know, we all serve somebody. We all serve somebody. You may think that you're not serving anyone. We all serve somebody. Okay? When I was young, I used to listen to Bob Dylan's song, "Gotta Serve Somebody." How many of you know that song? Yeah? Oh, thank you. I'm in a good crowd here, right? And you gotta serve somebody. You know that tune, right? Yes. So he said, this is what he wrote. I like one of the couple of the verses that you may be a preacher with spiritual pride. You may be a city councilman taking bribes on the side. You may be working as in a barber shop. You may know how to cut hair. You may be somebody's mistress, maybe somebody's heir, but you got to serve somebody. Yes, you got to serve somebody. It may be the devil or it may be the Lord, but you got to serve somebody. All of us serve somebody. It may be the devil, it may be the Lord, it may be something else, but you serve somebody. You're accountable to somebody. See? A husband is accountable to the wife. A wife is accountable to the husband. Children are accountable to the fathers. You're accountable to your boss. You're accountable to the people that work under you. Are you accountable? Joseph was accountable. He was accountable. Adversity does not excuse us from responsibility. See? Adversity does not excuse us from accountability. Just because you go through trials and tribulations in your life does not mean you get a free pass to sin. No. You don't get a free pass to do whatever you want because you're going through hardship in your life. Oh, God will understand. Lord, what a burden I'm bearing. Let me go sin and forgive me. No. Adversity does not excuse us from accountability. Even when Joseph was a slave, he was accountable to his master and he was accountable to God. Whatever he did or he didn't do, he would be accountable. Some of you sitting here or some of us sitting here, we may feel like, oh, this is so hard for me today. I'll just do whatever I want. I'll give up. No, you can't give up. You got to fulfill what the Lord has called us to do. And the third thing that we want to do, we want to look at is integrity. Integrity. Can young people say integrity loud? Integrity. Yes, thank you. Integrity. And you got to stay committed and not compromise. So I want to speak to the younger people today and young gals. Okay, the younger one. See, Joseph was a very handsome man. Handsome young man. Okay? Just a splitting image of your pastor. Just so handsome, right? So, when Potiphar's wife saw that Joseph was a very handsome young man, what did she do? She yearned for him. See? She yearned for him. And she said to Joseph, Joseph, your master is not at home. He is doing his business. Come with me. Come and lie with me. Okay? It was not just one time. The Bible says every day, his master's wife was calling Joseph to come. You know what Joseph did? He stayed committed to what the master had committed to him. The master said to Joseph, Joseph, everything in my house belongs to you. I want you to take care of everything that is in my house except my wife, right? So Joseph was committed to that. Another thing, he did not compromise because he said to Potiphar's wife, and I will read the scripture for you here, and he refused and said to his master's wife, look, my master does not know what is with me in the house. He has committed all that he has to my hand. There is no greater in this house than I. nor has he kept back anything from me but you, because you are his wife. And he will say, how can I do such a wicked thing before the eyes of the Lord? You cannot compromise your principle and your truth, even in times of trials and tribulations and affliction. When God calls you to do something and to stay the course, you got to stay the course. You may be a handsome young man, you may be a pretty young woman, but God has a purpose for you in your life. And God wants you to follow Him and to serve Him, not the world and to Satan, and not to sell your soul and your body to the world. That you will not compromise to the seduction of Satan. Because Satan wants to kill, to rob, and destroy everything. But you have to be a person of integrity. Be accountable to God. That in trials and afflictions, you continue to follow the Lord. And so I spoke that to the young people, young boys and men, young girls and women here. But that's for all of us. For all of us, that in trials and afflictions, do you think that Satan will not tempt you? I guarantee you that Satan would tempt you even in trials and afflictions, that you will sell your soul and find an easy way out from that trials and tribulations. The easy way out for Joseph would have been to lie with his master's wife, and he wouldn't be in prison. But that's not what he did. He did not compromise on his fear of the Lord, knowing that that was wrong thing to do. And he stood even in the face of receiving the punishment of going to jail. I guarantee you, Satan will seduce you or try to seduce you even in trials and afflictions. We cannot fall into the seduction of Satan. We have to ask the Lord to give us strength and stay committed to the calling that He has for you. That I will run the race. Isn't that what Paul say? I will run the race. I will press on toward the call. I have not achieved it, but I'm going to run the race. And the fifth thing that I want to talk about is faithful. Wait on the Lord. To wait on God. And to work with the Lord. You know, I've visited prison. And when you visit a prison, the men on the other side of the glass, they're not joyful. Right? I mean, I have a mixed feeling, mixed emotion on visiting prison. Because when you go them, when you listen to them, they will tell you everything that have gone wrong. They will tell you that they shouldn't be there in prison. Okay? They will tell you, I shouldn't be here. Can you get me out of here as soon as possible? They will complain about the food. They will complain about the police officers. They will complain about how bad their inmates are, that his life or her life is in danger. It's not a good experience there. It's not a joyful experience. They are really, when you look at them, you feel sad. You feel sad. And say, I want to get out. And they are emotional. They will cry. Sometimes some prisoner talks about, I know why I'm here. And making the bad into good. I'm sharing my faith to my fellow prisoners. I'm taking my Bible and reading with them. You will also hear that. Okay. Now, look at this. When Joseph went to prison, you didn't hear that from Joseph. He didn't say, why am I here? He wasn't sad or he doesn't look defeated. How do we know that? Because he was taking care of the king's prisoners, and when he went in there, the keeper of the prison saw that the Lord was with Joseph, and he gave Joseph all the prisoners in his hand to take care of it. See? So even in prison, you see that the Lord was with Joseph, and the favor of the Lord followed Joseph. The mercy and favor of the Lord continued to follow Joseph even in prison. Just imagine us being in prison, even as a believer, and falsely accused, he didn't do wrong. It would have been very devastating that it can destroy and question our faith. But God's mercy and favor followed Joseph, and the keeper of the prisoner said, I give you all the prisoners into your hand. He worked in prison. And people saw that the favor of God with Joseph even in prison. He was faithful to God. We got to remain faithful even when we have trials and afflictions. You know, one of the things that I know about my wife, when his mother died, by the way, it's just her and my wife. So when my wife's mother died, she was left all alone because my wife never knew her father. It's a hard thing to be. Many of you have siblings. You have brothers and sisters. You have fathers, mothers. You will never think about being alone in your life. But just imagine that she has uncle, aunts, and big family. But as a part of a family, that you are just alone. That's what I felt when her mother passed away. It was a difficult time. But you didn't know that in the church because she showed up every day. She showed up every day to work at the daycare. She showed up every day to teach the children. She showed up every day to sing in the worship team. And when you look at her, you will feel like, oh, she's not going through anything in her life. But that is not true. But why do we do that? We do that because we are called to serve Him in good times and in bad times. We got to show up. We got to fulfill the calling. Our afflictions and trials does not excuse us to say, hey, I give you holiday to follow you, to follow me. God does not say, my son, my daughter, you're going through a difficult time. I'm going to give you 1 month not to follow me and do whatever you want. No, our Christian life is not like that. We follow Him all the days of our life, whether good things happen or bad things happen to us. And this is important. It's the mark of maturity in Christian life. When you show up when things are not going right. When you show up when things are going tough for you. You know that you're committed to follow the Lord. You're faithful to His calling. Because in the end, He will prevail. In the end, God will prevail. We got to be faithful like Joseph. But remember, going through trials and affliction does not mean God has forsaken us. His mercy and favor can follow us in the midst of trials and afflictions. He would tell the prisoner, when the two prisoners that were freed after the dream, remember? He told them, but remember me when it is well with you. Please show kindness to me. Make mention of me to Pharaoh and get me out of this house. For indeed, I was stolen away from the land of the Hebrews. And also I have done nothing here. They should not put me into this dungeon. But that chief butler forgot him. For how many? For 2 years. He forgot him. He didn't even mention to Pharaoh. Joseph has to linger in the prison for 2 years. The last thing that I want to share today is to serve. That we got to serve in times of trials and tribulations and afflictions. Okay? And I want to focus to the table, the Lord's table, as we look at this last point. That our heart is ready. That we are called to serve God. That if we want to be great in God's kingdom, that we have to be a servant. Joseph served even when he was in prison as a slave. Just 2 things. How did he serve? Okay, the chief butler and the chief baker were put in prison because Pharaoh was angry with them. Right? So they both had a dream. And in the morning, they were sad because of the dream. And Joseph said, hey, what's up? What's up, guys? Why are you guys sad? And he said, we had a dream. And the chief butler said, I dreamed of 3 branches of vines. And it budded and flower came out. And it bring forth grapes. And I took the grapes and squeezed into the cup of Pharaoh and served him. Right? If it was us, how would you interpret that? Oh, was the grace good? you know. But he said, in 3 days you will be free and you'll be restored in the place of Pharaoh. Okay? The second one also came and said, hey, I had a dream. What was the dream? I had 3 white baskets in my head. There were all kinds of bread, and the birds of the air came and ate bread from the basket on my head. And Joseph told him, in 3 days you'll be free, but you'll be hanged. You'll be out of the prison, but you're going to be hanged. So in 3 days, they came. The chief butler was restored to his place, and the chief baker was hanged. So he served God, even in serving God, telling him wisdom of God. Now, a couple of days later, Pharaoh had a dream. He was in the river. He looked at the river. There were fine-looking fat cows that came out of the river. And then there were gaunt, ugly-looking 7 cows came out, right? 7 fine-looking cows. And what happens? That gaunt, ugly-looking cows swallowed the fine-looking fat cows. Second dream. There were good, plump-looking grains. And then thin-head grains that came out. And the thin-head grains swallowed the good, plump-looking grains. Pharaoh is very troubled with this dream. And he called the magicians in Egypt. He said, tell me the meaning of this dream. And they couldn't tell him. At that time, who remembered Joseph? The chief butler. The chief butler remembers. Oh, there was a man in prison. His name Joseph. He told me all about my dream and I'm here. So the Pharaoh called him. And he told the dream. And Joseph said, Pharaoh, there's going to be 7 good years of harvest, and there will be 7 years of famine. You take the harvest and store the grain. Make use of these 7 good years. And Pharaoh did that. Pharaoh did that. He served even in prison. He served even as a slave. What I want to remind us is that in trials and affliction, we can serve God. We can serve God. So that's the lesson that we need to learn from Joseph. The 6 lessons. Look at it again in your Sunday bulletin and see if you're going through, and compare your suffering with Joseph. Is your affliction to the same degree that Joseph is going through or had gone through? I hope that we'll stand strong and stand firm in the Word of God, knowing that God will prevail. God will prevail.